We'll start in a couple of minutes, but I just thought I would let you know that thanks to the suggestion of one of the library patrons, we're going to be taping this tonight. And then it will be available to view on our YouTube channel probably Friday, maybe tomorrow, probably Friday. So you don't have to write down every single thing that you see or hear up here. Also, it'll be a good place to send friends and family who are interested in this sort of thing. And there's lots of other cool stuff on the library YouTube channel. If you haven't already discovered that, check it out sometime. Before I pass the mic, so to speak, over to these folks, I just wanted to let you know a few other things that are going on this spring. Spring is a busy time for everybody, including us at the library, and we put together a series of different sort of nature/environmental programs that are gonna, well, they launch tonight and they'll go on through probably May or June. Got a whole bunch of different things lined up, but I'm just going to talk to you about 5 right now. This one, you obviously know about, you're here. Next Wednesday, KU professor Town Peterson is going to talk about a project of his called 150 Years of Change on the Great Plains. What Town did was follow the footsteps or maybe hoofbeats of a photographer from the 1870s who followed the railroad line west across Kansas as it was from Kansas City, I think all the way to Denver, although I don't think his photography project covers that whole distance. But what he has done is sort of a re-photography project following the original photograph locations as much as they could discover and find, and then taking a shot from that location today and see how they compare, not just for fun or artistic merit, but also ecologically. So he's going to talk a lot about that at his presentation next week, and it's sort of an interesting setup as well because he has published a book about this with the photos in it, but it's not a book that we're all kind of used to. It's a print-on-demand book. So he's going to bring a Q code that you can scan, a handy bookmark with a Q code on it. You can scan that, and then you can download and buy his book that way, rather than check. We do have actually a hard copy here at the library, but it's already got some holds on it. But he can tell you more about that detail next week. 150 Years of Change on the Great Plains with Town Peterson. On Monday, February 3rd, we're going to do the second in sort of a Kansas Land Trust series, and it's going to be on eBirding. And I know some of you are birders, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard about eBird and various birding apps that are available on cell phones. The KLT is going to do a workshop on eBirding here, and then 2 weeks, I'm sorry, I don't think that's true, but that's on February 3rd, and then on March 1st, we're going to follow up that workshop in the field. We're going to take our phones and our teachers out to Lawrence Nature Park and see how good we are at eBird and eBirding. In between those two things, on Tuesday, February 18th, Kelly Kincher is going to be here to talk about edible wild plants of the prairie. That might sound sort of familiar to you because he published a book on edible wild plants of the prairie something like 40 years ago, and now he has just published a new edition. So he's going to be here to show and tell his new edition with some photos, and we'll also have the Raven selling the book here. So tonight, I want to introduce Kaitlyn and Kaitlyn, and I'm going to let them take it from here, really, and tell you who they are and why they're here and what they're up to when it comes to preserving land in Douglas County. Kaitlyn, why don't you go first?
Okay, great. Thank you, Jake. So we're gathered here this evening to talk about a pilot program that's really exciting. It's the first of its kind in the state of Kansas, and it's between private nonprofits, private voluntary landowners, and then a public entity, the county. So I'm Kaitlin Stanley, and I'm with the Kansas Land Trust, and we work to protect lands of ecological, cultural, recreational, or agricultural significance across the state. And then this is my partner.
I'm Kaitlyn Ammerlaan. I'm the Heritage Conservation Coordinator with Douglas County. So I work in Douglas County Administration and oversee natural and cultural heritage projects for the county, which include the Natural and Cultural Heritage Grant Program, which is a really unique, super awesome, in my totally biased opinion, grant program that funds community projects that deal with all sorts of natural and cultural heritage themes, and is really the county's anchor for supporting those efforts, among many other things that I could spend too long talking about. But that includes touching our open space initiatives, which kind of this program falls into.
So just briefly, I wanted to let you know that we're leaving a lot of room for Q&A because we know that all landowners have different interests and you all may be here for different reasons, so we're leaving a lot of room for that at the end. We're just going to go over the program for a little bit and how we protect lands, that tool that we use to do that, and then we'll launch into our Q&A.
Alrighty, so why is Douglas County involved in this, and how did we get here? From the county perspective, this land conservation has been something that has been in the community conversation for a long time. As Kaitlyn will mention too, this is has been a part of Douglas County for a while, and there's been a lot of different efforts, both from the private side and the public side of wanting to protect those natural resource and conservation values. And Douglas County is fairly unique. There's a lot of unique pressures. We're not too far from Kansas City. We have the city of Lawrence here, but we also have a lot of rural land, a lot of rural property owners. So it's a real unique mix and with a lot of unique demands, needs, pressures, and so making sure that we retain those conservation values in our natural resources is one thing to consider among many. This has been considered in a bunch of different ways. It kind of came up in the Horizon 2020 as a need for more open space planning. That was seen through an early initiative that some of you folks might have been involved in called Eco Squared. That was a really dynamic planning process that included both environmental conservation and economic development. That plan really laid the foundation for where we got to today, but it was finalized in 2007, which was a rough time to be initiating new programs at this level. So it kind of fizzled out a little bit, but it was reborn with the Plan 2040, which called for an open space plan for the unincorporated areas of Douglas County. That was picked up and put forward by the Douglas County Board of County Commissioners and chartered in 2019. And that planning work was completed last year. It was about a 12-month planning process to develop an open space plan for Douglas County. It was very comprehensive. Hopefully most of you had heard about it or contributed in some way. We had multiple surveys throughout the process, lots of public input that really helped us create a vision and outline some values for what we want to see in land conservation and access to our conserved lands into the future. And so one of the main pieces that came out of that plan, there was a couple of different ways that the county identified where we can make an impact now, and one of those areas being private land support. So we heard from a lot of property owners that they might be interested in long-term conservation options for their property, but that there were either not enough resources to accomplish that, or they might not have known where to start. So this program, this pilot program, really came from that goal of where we can, help, bridge that resource gap, and kind of led to where we are today.
Awesome. Yeah, so it led to this partnership, which, as I mentioned, is new to Kansas. So a lot of our surrounding states do have dedicated state conservation funding, and Kansas doesn't. So this is a really great opportunity for Kansas, the state, to just see an example of this in action. And because of that, though, it's a pilot program. So we are encouraging everybody, if you have interest in this, to apply to this pilot program, because we don't know if this will sustain in the long term, the funding for this. We're hopeful that there will be county support for a continued program specifically for land conservation, but just encouraging everyone to take advantage of applying for this opportunity right now. So over the past 14,000 years in what we call Kansas today, humans have had a role in choosing to conserve land and steward it. All of us that are here in Douglas County, we know it's a really special place. We choose to live here because of all of the things that make it beautiful and wonderful to be here. We have the Wakarusa wetlands, which have the cultural and ecological significance, which is inextricably linked. We have a really awesome food system here in northeastern Douglas County, and with the Food Policy Council as one of the leaders of food policy councils in the region, and one of the first CSAs, I think, was in Douglas County in the state. So we have a lot of agricultural and cultural and ecological lands that are significant to us. And that land ethic is how the Kansas Land Trust was born out of the plowing of Elkins Prairie back in 1990. Then that led to a bunch of people rallying together and trying to find a way to make sure that land could permanently be protected in Kansas. And so that led to the passage of the Uniform Conservation Easement Act. And the Kansas Land Trust then used that tool to protect the first protected property in Kansas, which is the Elkins Prairie. And that's 16 acres of land that has a federally threatened species, Mead's milkweed there. And it's open to the public, and it's a really wonderful easement and one of the first examples of how we can do this. So that's here in the county. If you haven't visited, I definitely encourage you to do that. And so I mentioned conservation easements, and so this is the tool that we use to protect land here in Kansas. I'd just like to see how many people are familiar with conservation easements or have heard of them. A raise of hands for, okay. So most people are familiar with them to some degree. So they are voluntary agreements where we work with landowners who come to us if they want to protect their land, and they want to retain that private ownership. So that's how the agreement works, is the Kansas Land Trust holds the development rights. Those are just transferred to us over the course of a lot of drafting a conservation easement. We do a lot of work together with the landowner to make sure that the rights that they want to retain are theirs, and then we hold the proper development rights. It has to have a public benefit as part of the conservation easements, especially with this county funding. There needs to be significant conservation benefit for the public. One important thing to note about our conservation easements is that they are perpetual, so they do last forever. That's not always the case with easements, but with the Kansas Land Trust ones, that is. And so with this county partnership, this is how we're doing the land conservation together, is this tool of conservation easements. So we want to just go over some of the highlights that are in your program guidelines for if you're interested in applying. But we want to talk about eligibility first. So eligible costs is what we want to talk about first. So conservation easements are kind of costly, and we've heard from landowners that they can be cost prohibitive, and that's part of where the funding came in from the county. And so due diligence is part of the conservation easement, and so those costs are eligible to be covered by this program. This does have matching funds is an important part, so we are asking that people are contributing to some degree, but it's sliding scale matching funds, and so it's not a one-size-fits-all. We're being really flexible in what we do with each specific property and property owner based on their needs. And then another important thing about this program is that this is only for donated easements. So there are a few different kinds of conservation easements, and donated is the only one that this is working with for Douglas County. So that means that the landowner, we do an appraisal of the before value, before a conservation easement is placed on the property, excuse me, and then an appraisal of after. And that difference in the appraised value is what the easement value is. Now that is then donated, and then there are charitable tax deductions that the landowner can receive for that value. And then the other really important thing to note is the due date for applications, which is February 28th, and then all projects have to be complete by November 30th, 2026.
I can do this part.
Okay,
Oh, sweet. And so I guess I'll just echo a couple of things from that Kaitlyn mentioned there. This program is a one-time program, and since it's grant funded, the grant funds actually have they have to be spent by the end of 2026. So this is pretty unique in that the projects you should be fairly ready to get into this. It can be an extensive process. We've got plenty of support to kind of support that expedited timeline, but as we'll kind of go into a bit, as Kaitlyn talks a bit more about what that process looks like, it can take quite a bit of time. But often the part that takes the longest in this is finding the funding, but this is a really unique situation in which the bulk of the funding for this project will be provided by this program. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested and thinks that this might be a good fit to apply now, as it is a one-time sort of deal right now. And so just want to highlight that there, and that these funds will support those due diligence and those fees that are typically associated with those. And so getting into the eligibility of the program, sort of what we're looking for, what land is eligible for this program. It has to be located in Douglas County, a Douglas County funded program benefiting Douglas County lands. That, I think, is the simplest one. But yes, and then because these are going to be easements held by and selected by the Kansas Land Trust, all projects will have to follow KLT's selection criteria. So that's kind of foremost.
And
in this.
All of that is on the back table. We have all of the guidelines for this and the conservation criteria. So each property does need to meet that KLT conservation criteria. And anyone watching this, that's all available on the website as well.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's important. Douglas County might be helping facilitate some of the process, but this will be held by the Kansas Land Trust, and you'll be working with the Kansas Land Trust for these easements. So that's that, and then moving through the rest of the eligibility criteria, those next three are kind of pulled from the open space plan. So just ensuring any project that is selected for this program will generally be in line with the values outlined in the open space plan and any other existing community plans for Douglas County. So just kind of reinstating the goals in that plan. There is a whole lot of overlap between the Kansas Land Trust their criteria and our Douglas County criteria. So generally, they're kind of restated there, but if you fall under one, you should probably fall under the other. And we have specifically outlined those four types of land or open space features that should be you have to have at least one of those main features on the property to qualify. Those are fairly broad, but they include natural resources, historic and cultural importance, agricultural value, and recreation. And so that just kind of emphasizes that we're looking to conserve those kind of core conservation values. That could look different for each property. I think we'll repeat this a lot, but each easement's unique, each property is unique, each property has its own sort of significance that it brings. And so that's true for both the open space features and those things that make it special, as well as what the public benefit could look like. So this is the really important part about this program, and I think it's important about county involvement here, is that it has some significant public benefit. I think often when we hear public benefit, our brains probably go directly to public access and having folks out on the land. And that is one way to sort of achieve that public benefit is welcoming folks. And, it could look like a park that's open, fairly regularly, but it could also look like regular tours or allowing educational access for school groups or community groups, things like that. So that's one way that public benefit can be achieved, but it could also be achieved through, there's a whole list. Is this the list?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah. She's beautiful. But there's a lot of different ways, which include ecological significance. I think one of the most important ones from the county perspective as well is sort of floodplain and resilience. So that, lands along rivers provide a huge benefit to the rest of, county residents for absorbing floodwaters. So that's definitely something that we're interested in from the county perspective and is a public benefit. So that list there, so it's, again, super unique to each property. There's a question on the application that asks you to describe that benefit. And so I think that gives you really the space to, share that with us and kind of what you think would, your property would provide to the residents and visitors of Douglas County. So all to say, I think the most important bit there is that it can be public access, but it does not have to be. So I would not let that hold you back from that.
And there's a lot of ways that public access can work on a conservation easement. And so we have 13, the Kansas Land Trust has 13 easements in Douglas County, and 3 of those have regular public access. So one of them, it's just that the landowner simply wants to know if you're gonna be out on the land, but it's fairly open. And then one of them is the Lawrence Nature Park. And so that's an example of a property where private landowners knew that they wanted to make a public park with the land that they had, and they saw that development was rapidly spreading, and so they protected that area with a conservation easement. And then they knew that because they wanted it to be a public park, they were going to transfer that ownership to some public entity. And so it ended up working out that they transferred that to the city of Lawrence. So that's one way. And then the third example that we have is that Aiken Prairie that I mentioned earlier, which is just regular access. It's still a private landowner that owns that and pays that, but people are welcome to visit that prairie. So there's many ways that you can do that. There's not a one-size-fits-all. If you choose to have public access, then there's lots of flexibility in how that can look. So we're just really quickly wanting to hit the deadlines again because February 28th is around the corner, so just wanting to make sure everybody has that in the back of their mind for applications. And spreading the word to people. If you're not yourself interested in applying, just making sure everybody is aware of that. This seems like it's a long time from February to completing the project in November 2026, but it's not, and easements take a while, so this is actually kind of an expedited process for us, but this is the date that it needs to be completed, is that November 26th. I do want to go back and just talk about the application review and budget. So once applications are in, our team will look at them and then reach out to landowners and schedule a site visit to get on the property and connect with the landowner that way. And also that's when we'll talk about budget. So you can list your resources in the application, but we'll talk more specifics about budget when we connect with the landowners during that time.
I'll just add there, so as far as the county's involvement, so we'll be kind of involved in that site visit and just reviewing to make sure that the projects are eligible. But then after that, KLT takes over and they'll be responsible for the final selection of the projects and sort of the accounting of it all and ensuring, the final slate of what they're able to accomplish.
Yeah, and so our board will vote at our March meeting on the projects that we're going to take on, and so then in April, folks will be notified. So this is just a little bit of a deeper dive into how the almost two-year process would look. So again, this is the time for applications review and then starting the project. After this, we get together with the landowner and do a landowner interview, which helps inform drafting the conservation easement. The landowner is responsible for helping to gather any relevant documents that can help inform the easement, help with the due diligence, so deeds, if there are any trusts, anything like that, if you have any easements existing, so all of relevant property documents. And then both parties do legal and financial planning. We just encourage all landowners to seek legal counsel in this decision. This is a permanent decision. It lasts longer than marriages. It's very important. So we want you to just make sure that you know what you're getting into. And so we just recommend everybody does that. And we cannot provide any tax advice throughout this. So we do know that conservation easements, people can get charitable tax deductions, but that's up to you to talk to your tax preparer about how that works. Then we work on drafting the actual easement, and this is a back and forth, a conversation where we have our easement template and we provide that to you. You let us know if there are certain rights or restrictions that you want to retain, and we just kind of make our own unique easement. That, like I said, everyone is unique to each property. So can be a lengthy process, that back and forth in negotiating terms of the easement. Then the due diligence, which is just simply all of the things that you need to do when you're entering into a binding legal contract. It's very similar to most real estate transactions. So the things that are not always the same are environmental site assessment, which we often will do on a site, but landowners that can help us identify if there are any hazards, environmental hazards, that helps in that process. So that's that early paperwork. We do title review and commitment, appraisal, and that's how we get that donative value that I mentioned earlier. And then we do surveys that will be recorded with the conservation easement. And then we do a baseline documentation, which is simply going out to the property, visiting it, seeing every corner of it, and documenting the condition of it as it goes into the easement and is protected. Because that's what our team then annually goes out and visits the property, and we want to make sure that that's maintained. And that's our promise, is to protect that in perpetuity. So that baseline documentation is what we always measure those annual visits on to see if it's still in the state that it was when we protected it, the same state or improved condition. And then sometimes there's a mortgage on a property, and so then we just do a mortgage subordination as another piece of due diligence. So then when all of that looks good and we've all worked together on that, we do the final documents, so just final draft of the easement, and the board just approves all of the final language, the Kansas Land Trust Board, landowner agrees, and then we sign, close, and record with the County Register of Deeds. After closing, if you choose to take a charitable deduction, that's the time that you'll work with an appraiser to get that after value. And then you work with your tax preparer to do that necessary documentation, which is a Form 8283. And then the Kansas Land Trust, I mentioned this, we monitor the property annually. And we have legal defense as something that we will do if the property were ever need to be defended. So that's a KLT responsibility. That is it for the easement due diligence, so yeah.
Kaitlyn, I see that Douglas County is indicated on the engagement letters, a survey, and
Let's see.
recording, I understand it.
Yeah.
To what extent does the county, are they involved in, who is that? Does this all go before the commissioners?
No, so correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it does not.
Okay.
The funding has already been approved for this purpose, and it is essentially in the hands of the Kansas Land Trust at this point. We have an agreement signed with them to do this program.
So the county is not a party to the engagement letter, the agreement?
They are in the sense that they're funding this, and so we would just have that be listed on there. We do that with other funders too. Yep, they're the funding source. And so recording, I just have them there because we record at the County Register of Deeds. And then the other one is the survey. Yeah, we are just potentially going to work with, there's the opportunity to work with the county potentially on them doing some survey work. And so that's a potential. I don't know that
Yeah, it would be in a specific circumstance,
Yeah.
but I think through all of this is we're excited to explore how the county can support this work, but that's fairly unknown at this point. It's not something that's been done before, so there's a couple of areas where we might be able to help speed up the process, where, the Kansas Land Trust might have some backlogs in certain steps. This pilot program is a really good opportunity for us to learn how we can be supportive and help make it easier for both the Kansas Land Trust and for property owners, and ultimately for the county.
Yeah.
So, can I interrupt for a second? Since we're recording, I'd like to pass the microphone on to any questioners. So I'll pass it to you, and you can ask another question.
Public access would not have to be to the entire property.
Correct. Yep.
And that's something, Kaitlyn, that conservation in the easement itself, there's different, it could be spelled out in the easement what that looks like for the property.
Yep, absolutely. And also, I should mention this, that conservation easements do not need to cover the entire property. So that is definitely something, we can have a conservation easement on a portion of a property. So I don't know if that was clear.
So if not all the property is put into this, and the public cannot go on parts of it, then one or the other would have to be fenced off?
No, I don't think that's necessarily
How are you
true.
going to keep the public from not trespassing?
Well, I think, trails are one way that you can keep people on one part of the property, signage.
And then also, say if somebody's on a trail and they fall and break their leg, I mean, the landowner is liable for suing and...
So yeah, liability is something that we would certainly recommend that the landowner talks to their legal counsel about this. But one potential vehicle to kind of reduce that liability is for a property to register as agritourism, which can help reduce that liability. So that's a process that you can do by going to the, I don't remember what office it is at the state of Kansas, that you can register as an agritourism facility. And that's pretty wide in what agritourism means, and it can mean recreational access. We'd like to just ask what brought you here this evening.
Anyone wants to share?
Raise your hand.
We had to sit up here and talk for a while.
Kaitlin and Kaitlin know why I'm here. I just need to get this done. I have a piece of property I'm very interested in having an easement on, and I just dragged my heels on getting it done. So this has really prompted me to get an application.
Great.
And their help is great. If you want to have any questions, they'll always help you with it.
Thank you.
So this is a question about whether the Kansas Land Trust would, how the Kansas Land Trust might interact with a particular circumstance. And that is a situation many years ago where the city wanted to, my property is in the county, but was city property sort of nearby. And the city wanted to buy an easement across the middle of my property in order to put a water main that would serve part of the city far, far away from my property. And most of my neighbors saw free money and gave them easements, sold them easements. But they were very insistent about potentially burying this huge pipe right through the middle of my rotational grazing system. And it would have caused significant problems to my operation, short-term and long-term. And I spent, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years arguing with the city about this in multiple meetings and appraisals and stuff like that. And finally, we all kind of looked at each other and decided that we were probably all going to be retired or dead before the city funded the project, and we would just kick the can down the road, and if they got funding, they could come talk to me about an easement when they could answer my questions about what material is the pipe going to be, and how are they going to do biosecurity and stuff like that. And I'm wondering how the Kansas Land Trust would interact with a local government that's trying to access a land that's protected by an easement. Is that something that would put my land out of something you want to deal with just because there's that history in that plan on the books?
So a conservation easement can help deter development. I mean, it's definitely a great way to try to prevent it, but eminent domain will win. And so that's just something to keep in mind, is that eminent domain does have the final power. So, but we have found that conservation easements deter that from happening. And that's about all I can say about that. Each circumstance is very different, so. But it does prevent being developed, being built upon.
So this is a pilot program, but have you had this in other parts of the nation or Kansas?
So we just work in Kansas, the Kansas Land Trust does, and we've protected 82 properties across the state with conservation easements.
Okay, so my next question is, I want to know first if you've had, other people do this, and do any of them regret it or have second thoughts after they've signed, or?
I mean, if they do, we haven't heard that. But I think that, this is, like I said, it's a lengthy process to get to the end of a conservation easement. And I think that in that process, people really do some soul searching and think if this is the right thing for them before signing and recording. And everyone that has signed and recorded has decided that this is the right thing for them and their family and their property, and that this is the decision they want to make and the legacy they want to leave.
So how many did you say you've already?
82 in Kansas and 13 in Douglas County. Is everyone a landowner? Okay, yeah, you have a question?
I probably don't need the microphone. I've been told to quiet down and hush all my life.
I think it's for the recording purposes though, right? Sorry.
Okay, so I had two different questions. The first one is, once we give up our land to an easement, the land trust, from that time on, who is responsible for like the insurance and the taxes of the property that we have donated, why we're alive, and then, once we're not?
Yeah, so the land is still owned by the landowner. So all that's happening in the transaction is that we're just holding the development rights, but the land is still retained by the landowner. So insurance, property taxes, also maintenance of the land, all of that, it's simply just that we are taking development rights, but everything else is still the landowners, including if you decide to pass it on to somebody after you pass, or you can sell it, and the easement stays with the property regardless of those decisions.
Okay, so I guess my question is saying that, it's permanently protected. So what happens when, whenever I die and you say that the land is sold, then just the new landowner has this property that they're paying for, and maybe their interest or wanting isn't for nature and for land? I mean, how does that come into play? Because I think we're, at least my mother and I, trying to save the planet or nature and, all of that kind of stuff. And really my question is, what is the guarantee? I mean, we really can't do anything once we're gone.
Yeah.
So what kind of protections does it really have?
So it stays with the property in that it's recorded with the deed for the property. And so when somebody purchases the land, that the easement is with it, and they're informed that they have this easement that they have to uphold. So that's a decision for a buyer if they want to buy land that is protected by a conservation easement. And there are people that want to buy land that's protected and are grateful that somebody else went through the process of putting it into an easement. And so the people are out there that would want to own land that is protected by an easement, and that would just have to be the match for the land that that person ends up there. We monitor it each year and make sure that it is. And so we create a relationship with every landowner that owns the land and make sure that they understand the easement and the terms of the easement, and that they're upholding them. So.
Okay, thank you for that,
Yeah.
for clarifying that. The other thing was, once it's given to an easement, but we still own it, what happens in parts of our land? Like she had previously said that maybe some of it might be part of the rotational grazing, or, that we bale the native grass, for livestock and things like that. I mean, how does that affect it once we give it over? Can we no longer, plant crops or graze cattle or
No,
anything like
absolutely.
that?
Those uses are absolutely permitted. Definitely being on the land, managing the land is stewardship and necessary. So we protect agricultural land to be sustained as agricultural land. We protect land that's ranched to be sustained as ranching land. It's not that we're protecting land and saying now it has to go back to a prairie by any means. We protect woodlands. We protect land that is a riparian buffer and adjacent to waterways. There's a property that we protect that provides all of the drinking water for the city of Eudora. She has wells on the property and it's agricultural land. And yeah, you don't need to change your uses. We just need to make sure that your uses match with our vision for the lands that we want to protect. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
I think the one thing I'd add to that is that conservation easements are unique and expensive because they are permanent. So there are other possibilities for conservation, but they are not permanent. So this is the primary tool to kind of keep that running with the land. So that way those values are retained over time. So it's often a tool used by folks who want to see their land maintained, as it is in the state currently.
I'd like to go back to something that was asked earlier about some of the gray areas between public access and trespassing. Are these guidelines that are decided ahead and then posted on properties, or how do you set up enforceability?
So enforceability would still be on the private landowner. We just in the easement would say that there is permitted public access, and we define what that is. So, for instance, if somebody wanted camping, we'd define where camping could happen and then what amenities could be there for camping. But it would still be up to the landowner to enforce that people aren't leaving trash when they're camping or that they're staying in the camping area. And then when we monitor, if we saw something that was outside of the easement and the agreement, then we would let the landowner know. But that would be the extent of us enforcing it because we don't have eyes on all properties at all time, all of our protected properties.
All right, is that something you post then?
Yeah, so what we post is that the land is protected by the Kansas Land Trust, and so there's signage on our easements that say that, but then if folks want to permit access, then the two that I'm thinking of have different ways that they communicate what that access is, and that was the landowner's decision. So,
All right, thank you.
yep.
And there could always be the potential for partnerships with other organizations or
Yeah.
agencies to help
Absolutely.
facilitate that.
Yep.
There's the state walk-in hunting program that has its specific rules, and those are specific to each property in that program. And I don't want to volunteer any organizations, but there is always the possibility if you have a real strong interest in a particular field, connecting with those organizations and working out an agreement with a third party is another way to do that. I wouldn't say that's the county's not there, so I would not volunteer the county at this moment. But as this moves forward, and with like this, the Lawrence Nature Park example, that was a well-crafted agreement that ended up having that third party of the city of Lawrence to help facilitate that. So there's a lot of possibilities there,
Yeah.
but that would just be work in addition to the easement. But the foundation of that could be the conservation easement, and then that could be something you figure out along the way. So it wouldn't all have to fall on you if you don't want it to. And,
Yeah.
there's, I think, a lot of room for creativity there. Again, it just comes down to the particular parcel.
No, that's a great point. Yep, there are a lot of partners out there, conservation partners, that would love to see more public access as well. And so if that's something you wanted to do and partnering with them, that would be welcome.
I think that's something we'd be glad to help facilitate
Yeah.
in the long term.
Yep, and we can even try to connect you to the right people.
So you said that in Douglas County, there are 13 properties?
Yeah.
Are those listed somewhere? Are they online, or,
So we keep our We keep the landowner's information private, so we don't give exact locations to anything, but we do have a map of our easements with general location of them on our website, but we don't give out private landowner information. But you can see generally where they are in the county on the map on the Kansas Land Trust website.
And are there descriptions about?
Yeah, there are descriptions about what that value of that land is, that conservation value that we've protected. And all of our Kansas easements are on there. So you can search by county in our map.
At one time, there was an interesting quirk about dividing the ownership of the land after there was an easement on it.
To subdivide,
Or
Yeah.
like if you had 3 children and you wanted them to divide it among them. Can you elaborate on what that
yeah,
is
so
about?
we do try to limit subdivision on protected properties. And if you want to retain the right to subdivide, then that needs to be written into the easement. And we do like to know where those subdivision lines plan to be, even if they're not happening at this time. We do want to know where the land will be subdivided. And then obviously all of that land that's still protected by the easement cannot be developed. So even once subdivided and given to 3 different children, it still has to stay in the state that it was. But we can work with landowners who want to retain the right to subdivide, but we do prefer that people don't subdivide because that can just lead to some encroachment issues, and then you have multiple neighbors, future neighbors in one protected property, and lots of unknown issues there. But yeah, if you do want to retain the right to subdivide, we do permit that. We just need to know where that subdivision line is, and it needs to be surveyed in for the easement. Well, if there aren't any other questions, then please take home all of the food and enjoy. We don't want to take any of that with us. Thank you all for coming out this evening to learn about this program, and we'll both be here for a while, so if anyone wants to ask questions not on the microphone, then we can do that as well.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Jake.
Thanks.